So, hi everyone, I'm Patrick from PhD. I've never presented at GPSL before. I was hoping to be there in person this year, but I have a little 3-month-old baby girl here at home that keeps me tethered, unlike my balloons. So here I am, presenting to you from the suburbs of Chicago. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Meshtastic. So Glenn just touched on the 900 megahertz band and interesting things that people are doing there. And I've been into balloons for a few years, but then started playing this year with, over the last year with Meshtastic on some balloon plates. And mostly my approach to it was, why the heck not? I have no idea what's going to happen when I put something like this up on a balloon. And at the time that I'd flown the first one, I didn't know of anybody having tried it other than like one group, and they were doing like some really primitive stuff with it. So anyway, why put it on a balloon? And I'll tell you a little bit of stories. I've done 3 flights now with it. A little bit about me. There's me. This is the happiest that I get is holding a balloon. Probably like many of you, the thrill of the whole thing is mostly the fun. But I first got into flying electronics things a long time ago, reading an XKCD comic about fun things that you can do with kites, and I got into putting Raspberry Pis on kites like 10 or 15 years ago, and took pictures of different places that I would travel in the world using Raspberry Pis on kites, which would have been much easier with today's technology. And then I lived in the UK for a while, and I stumbled across the UK Altitude Society like almost entirely by chance, and tracked my first flight. I won't take you through every last inch of this. You can click on my links in the slides later if you want to read any of my random blog posts about stuff that I've done. But got into the UK Altitude Society, went to a UK HASS conference, tracked my first balloons, and then was just like, okay, I have to do this, I have to go and build something. And then in 2019, I moved back to the US. I started playing with tracking radio songs, and then I stopped. I got busy, I had another kid. It happens when you have kids. And but then in 2023, I started actually finding and capturing radio songs, and then trying to learn how to program them. And what got me back into it was failing miserably to program them, and then waking up one day and realizing that RS-41NG had been ported to DFM-17 songs, of which I have a box full of them. So last year I started gearing up for doing a first flight, and I was going to attach a whole bunch of payloads to the thing, because I was like, it's taken me forever to get everything ready. And then around the same time I started experimenting with Meshtastic, and I said, what the heck, why not attach one of these to a balloon and see what can happen? So I'll start with a little bit on what is Meshtastic. So it was originally designed for the use case that everybody talks about with Meshtastic is you have 2 people going hiking in the woods, there's no self-service, and you want to be able to keep track of each other's GPS coordinates, maybe send a text message, oh, I'm by the big rock, or something like that. And it works fabulously for stuff like this. It uses LoRa radios under the hood, exactly like Glenn's story, and so many people have told stories over the years. Like, it's pretty incredible what you can do with really, really low power on some of these devices. And the cool thing about Meshtastic is the use case is centered around Bluetooth pairing to smartphones, so your interface is a smartphone app. So the standard average user interface is walking around with a smartphone, and you have a radio in your bag or whatever, and you're out doing whatever it is that you need to do. Small antennas, big antennas, whatever. And Meshtastic is also interesting in that it's a mesh network. Every node repeats every packet that it hears, so it has a lot of similarities to APRS in that sort of sense. It runs on an ISM band, so you don't have to have a license for it. One of the cool things that you get when you're not running things licensed is that by default it supports encryption. So if you want to hide what you're saying from people, I'm not doing that with a balloon, but some people think of Meshtastic as almost like a what if the world's coming to an end kind of radio network. So anyway, there's different frequencies that people use in the world, but one of the other cool things about it is that there's standardized frequencies for different regions in the world. So in the US it's 906 point something megahertz, I can't remember the exact number. And because everybody's using the same frequency by default and the same modulation by default, nodes discover each other, which becomes really fun when you put it on a balloon, because people who don't know that you're about to fly a balloon are going to get packets from you. So clench on some fun pictures. Here's some other fun pictures of devices. The one on the right is my favorite one. It's actually only about 2 inches tall. It's incredibly power efficient. There's one that Rockland Wireless makes. But loads of ESP32 devices that are really cheap, T-beams and LilyGo LoRa32 devices. If you use RDZ TTGo Sound to chase things, or MySondiGo, I think uses the same hardware. Literally, like when I started reading about Meshtastic, I was like, oh, this is the same hardware that I already have, just a different. So these devices are incredibly cheap and very, very easy to come by. Meshtastic supports some ridiculous number of like 40 different devices that they have build types for, with varying build quality. So Meshtastic also has this concept of a centralized MQTT server, so it's optional. You can publish position packets if you want on this network, and you can also publish them out to the internet, which means discovering where other people are on the map gets a little bit easier. And a lot of Meshtastic energy, people's energy, is around trying to bridge gaps, like physically between people's houses in different neighborhoods. For me, living in the suburbs of Chicago, it's always, can I send a packet to somebody in downtown Chicago? Or vice versa. Can we complete a circuit over this sort of distance here? And it's grown massively in the last year. Like, there's like 100 nodes or so that are published to this map in Chicago today. And a year ago, it was probably about 10. So lots and lots of people experimenting with it because of the low barrier to entry. Really cool guy named Brian Shea wrote this map that I'm showing you here. It's called Mesh Map. People who are publishing their positions, they're getting this stuff updated live on this website, again, very much like APRSIS and APRS.FI, same sorts of live views there. So I originally was just like, oh, what would happen if I put it on a balloon? And then I started to think a little bit of, could you use it as a tracker? Would there be any actual utility in utilizing that ground station network to actually be a primary payload tracker? Obviously, I never fly it without other stuff on board. But then also, what happens when you have, the Chicago area mesh and the Grand Rapids mesh that are separated by Lake Michigan suddenly merged with each other in the middle? Will people find it fun or useful? Will they find it annoying? Will it jam up everybody's radio band so much that no one can get anything done? And Meshtastic measures channel utilization as you fly, although I'll talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to try and collect a lot of data and see, like, is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is this a party trick? Is this disruptive? I don't know. So I'll move on into my flights and what we actually did. The first flight, which I lovingly call the tree flight, you can imagine how this flight ends. I only spent about a week building this payload. It's a little tracker, as you can see there on the left-hand side of the screen there, with an antenna pointed down. And then the picture on the right, you can't exactly see what's going on, but I've got it connected with a USB cable over to a Raspberry Pi. I wrote some code on the Raspberry Pi that would tell the thing to send a message every couple of minutes to tell me back on the ground who was actually online, or actually just a list of people who were online, and then did loads of data logging, which is on an SD card, which you can imagine where that SD card is right now. I never got it back. It was my first flight in about 5 years. Everything went wrong that day, other than the fact that we managed to actually get the flight off. Throughout the network, because of the fact that you're flying the thing and broadcasting your name, you can also put a website in there. So there's a Chicagoland Mesh website that has a link on the homepage for the Discord server, and this proved to actually be really fun for people. People would see, hey, new node online. Hey, look, it has a website on it. Oh, look, a chat server from some random person. Let's go join this chat server. And like 50 people who'd never heard of the Chicago area mesh went and joined onto this Discord server and said, what are you doing? This is really cool. And we're trading messages, relaying through my node. So here's a map, a very incomplete map of nodes that we hit. We hit people all the way from Ohio all the way up to Minneapolis, St. Paul on this flight. Not surprising to anybody who's done a balloon flight before, but to people who are used to ground level LoRa radios that only go a couple of miles, or maybe go 10 or 20 miles if you've got the world's greatest antenna, it was like magic to a lot of people. So the community engagement was really cool. The data logging was terrible, and unfortunately most of the data logging landed on an SD card, which I never got back. Everything else went wrong on this flight. With helium. A helium supplier didn't give me a full tank of helium, so there we sat with a 2/3 inflated balloon of helium while we went and sourced some of those amazing amazing balloon time helium tanks, which did actually work in a pinch. We had a camera cable came unplugged from one of the cameras that was supposed to send us pictures live, and then yeah, unfortunately, we had a bad landing. The best part of the whole thing, though, I had not thought very much about this beforehand. My favorite part was, you can see my two little kids there in the picture. I had this like smart moment as a dad where I said, "Hey kids, come here," and hold the payload line. And loads of you talk about doing this with student groups. Like, my kids who've been like around me in balloons for a while, but I've never really understood it, got to stand there and hold a balloon for a minute and feel how hard it pulls. And it was probably one of the best parenting moments that I had in all of it. It was just the awe on their face of the whole thing. We collected a lot of data, so you can see that the data in the red dots, that came from the Meshtastic packets that we were studying throughout the flight. The blue line is the DFM-17, that was like my reference telemetry string. It was actually the first time I'd flown that payload, and it flew really, really well. So it matched up really well right up until the point where it lost the GPS fix. It kept transmitting up until about burst, but it was rebooting at that point. Probably battery or something like that, or maybe it doesn't handle when the GPS doesn't work very well. The interesting thing, the thing that I was hoping to get out of it was, what is its perceived channel utilization? So when it's not transmitting, it's always listening. And there's loads of things on this band that can transmit there. And it said that my channel utilization never went over 5%, which seems kind of hard to believe given the view that you have. But maybe it's more of like a receiver sensitivity thing. So there's lots more data on board in an SD card that I may never get back. So it's my little homage to my flight. So a good thing came out of this whole thing, which is that I met a guy named Adam Katzman, KD9ZZF, who is affiliated with a group called Southside Hackerspace Chicago. What I didn't know is that this group had done balloon flights with the National Eclipse Ballooning Program, which I'm sure some of you here are familiar with. And Adam's group had applied to do a series of flights with the balloon program that started in January and February of this year. So I got a little bit busy having a baby, got really distracted. I went and built a WeNet payload. I stopped playing with Meshtastic for a little while. I was actually kind of sad from balloons for a little while. But I got the WeNet payload ready to go, and Adam and I were going back and forth about tracking his balloon. And then I said, wait, do you guys have any more payload mass? I just want to jam another Meshtastic payload on there and see what happens. And so I took one of the little ones that I had pictured earlier, the little 2-inch one, and I actually jammed it in a DFM-17 case. Wrote no code for the thing, didn't attach it to a Raspberry Pi, just literally attached the thing and flew it. And this was probably the best in terms of like community engagement and the number of people that we had actually observing the flight. Unfortunately, I had no data logging running. But we had the most interest from people. The really interesting thing is that within this nice little tight shell, the LiPo battery that came with the thing worked for the entire flight. It worked the entire way. And of course the best part is we actually got it back. Here's my dots of people that we got telemetry from. We had some fun that day. You'll see our flight path is a very, very long flight path. We underfilled the balloon a whole bunch. So we drove a lot further than we thought we were going to drive that day. But we got it back. It landed in a software developer's backyard of all the places for a balloon to land. Somebody completely understood what we were doing and thought it was a great idea. So this got me thinking, I need good data logging. I need to actually have something to learn. I think there might be something there to share with folks at GPSL this year, not just tinkering and party tricks. And so I said, oh, we got to get a good, strong radio and then also a good, strong data logging program. And then another ham gave me an idea, and then actually gave me the board that I used in the end for the third flight, which I will lovingly call slightly less unprepared. I did actually prepare for loads of things when I brought. This is a Raspberry Pi with a hat attached to it that has a LoRa radio connected over SPI. It's very similar to if you're building a WeNet payload or if you're building a pie in the sky type payload. It's almost the exact same pinout as something like that, just with a different frequency chip basically. So one of the local hams said, hey, it'd be really cool if you ran some code that when somebody sends out a text message while it's flying, it sends you back a personalized message that tells it where it is. So we read that. No one used it, but we wrote it. Because of the fact that you're in Linux here on a Raspberry Pi, then you have the ability to put the GPS into flight mode before you actually start the main software. So that means that we were able to get telemetry the whole way up. And what I really wanted to do on this flight was I wanted to get data through this MQTT network and get it onto SonHub, and I probably spent more time on that than I did on anything. And with a reasonable amount of success. So there is some code out there that I've written for if you have stuff on Meshtastic and publishing its information, we can get those put on the SonHub map. If anybody's doing this, shoot me a message. The code can be very, very easily modified and made generic. It worked. It was really interesting. Basically what I did was I had two different telemetry streams. One which was the public telemetry stream. But in the time between here and my first flight, Meshtastic introduced something called position ambiguity. Basically, they didn't want too many people accidentally publishing their exact coordinates and telling people where to go to find them. So they made it mandatory that if you're publishing your information to the internet, that it has to be imprecise information, rounded to like plus or like the nearest 400 meters or something. So I wanted a data stream that was high resolution positions. So for this flight, we actually flew, it's the same tracker, but actually two different data streams, and on SonHub it was represented as two different payloads. So you can see here in the graph, you have red dots for one tracker, which is what I call the Meshtastic uploader, which is some really simple code that I wrote, which is the high resolution coordinates. And then yellow, which is public nodes, basically unsuspecting ground stations uploading their data to that MQTT, basically that internet service. And the data is interesting. Basically on the ground, I was receiving loads of data, all the nice little red dots there. And then as we got up to altitude where we started to see lots of other Meshtastic receivers, we hit some sort of limitation somewhere, presumably just interference with broadcasting over other packets. Meshtastic has the ability to listen to see if anybody else is broadcasting and wait for what it thinks will be a free time slice. But I think it doesn't listen. I think it doesn't hear very well when you get up to a certain altitude. I think I need probably a much higher gain antenna to make sure that it's not broadcasting over somebody else. And basically we hit about 15 kilometers and got to the point where almost nothing was actually coming through. Interestingly enough, then up towards burst, we started to get packets again. But honestly, why is actually beyond me. And then as we came in towards landing, then my local receiver in the car started to pick it up and started to relay some telemetry data. So it was interesting, but I was hoping to get a lot more cool data. The other thing that went terribly wrong this weekend is the Meshtastic MQTT server is a single Linux server that's run by the Meshtastic team. I understand it's maintained by volunteers, and it was basically down for about 2 weeks leading up to the flight. It had like a connection limit, which meant only 1 out of every 100 radios around the world was actually connected to the thing. So throughout the flight, it looks like it actually got a lot of data, but actually only 2 ground stations were actually relaying anything back to me. So it was just a bit of a shame. A couple weeks later, they fixed it, of course. So the position ambiguity thing is kind of interesting. So this is an interesting map for you, pulled from the data that was fed through to SonHub. The blue line here being I'm going to call it the actual track from the 4FSK payload, which is transmitting, once every 10-15 seconds or something like that. And you can see the position ambiguity thing means everything looks like it's traveling in like perfectly straight or perfectly diagonal lines. And that's because your position packets are getting rounded to like a certain number. For general flight information, this looks quirky, but like it would actually be fine if you're sitting there looking at a data stream like this. However, if you're going to find that payload, it won't be as bad as a whisper square like we were talking about earlier, but it would be pretty bad. It would be pretty hard to find this payload if you didn't have another tracker source. But it is kind of fun to have the map to look at. That was one of the things that I wanted to do. So, alongside this, the Southside Hackerspace Chicago team was flying some really cool stuff. They're flying Insta360 cameras, and I wanted to show these couple of pictures. This has nothing to do with Meshtastic. The picture on the left is from an Insta360 camera, and they told it to zoom out as far as you can. Obviously, the Earth does not look that spherical when you're at altitude. This is actually the camera is attached to the string there, but this is probably the best picture that we took throughout all those flights. The thing on the right is a cool little experiment that somebody worked up, which is an augmented reality viewer that takes the data stream from SoundHub and actually visualizes it through your phone camera. And this is actual telemetry from this flight, where after we released the balloon, you can see where we held the balloon in the air here, this little cluster of greens on the right. And then you can kind of see how the balloon went up and did a little bit of it looks like a loop in 2 dimensions, and then flew away from us. And it was a cool idea, mostly because if you think about tracking a balloon as you're coming in for landing, and we had this on this flight, we were staring at the horizon looking where exactly we thought the balloon was going to be. We couldn't see the balloon. Had this tool been working there at the landing site, it might have helped us. Here's exactly where you need to look. So something cool that a guy named Andrew Snyder worked up. And there's a link in my notes here, if anybody wants to find that thing afterwards. So that's most of my story about what I've done with Meshtastic on balloons. It's obviously been a lot of fun. There's another group out of San Francisco. The San Francisco HAB group has been doing some flights. They tried to do a collaborative flight where 2 different teams would fly balloons at the same time. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. The second group, one of their flights didn't actually launch on time, so they were not in the air at the same time. But they've got some stuff on this blog here that I've linked. You can go read their stories. They're flying other fun things, VHF and UHF crossband repeaters and things like that. So other people are trying this and playing with it. I guess what I've learned so far is position ambiguity is weird, it works. I did actually learn that the altitude is not imprecise, so the altitude is based on the precision of whatever your GPS is. The Meshtastic API is half-baked. It works except for when it doesn't work. There are certain things that you do that cause it to randomly reboot the node. There are certain things that you do that the first time you fetch that data object works correctly, and then you fetch it a minute later and the data is stale, and there's no rational reason as to why. So I ran into a lot of weird inconsistencies programming it. There's not a lot of receivers out in the rural areas where you fly. It's not the end of the world, because once you're at altitude, you're probably going to be line of sight to some major population center where people are using it. But if you're thinking about it from like what you would use APRS for, having the community there track your payload as it's coming in towards landing, you're totally going to have your own coverage as you come in for landing. MQTT killed me on that flight because I wrote all this stuff for MQTT, and then MQTT server was broken. I haven't gotten like a really good picture of, is this really disruptive from an RF perspective? No one's complained, everybody seems to be really excited about it all, but none of my data that I collected told me, oh yeah, you're getting like really, really high channel utilization. Everything seemed almost bizarrely really low in terms of all its measurements. I've never quite figured out what to take away from that, other than I don't know if Meshtastic was built for this. So next, the thing that I wanted to do next is I wanted to fly 2 radios next to each other and compare and contrast afterwards. I was hoping to do that flight a few weeks ago, but I didn't get to it. So here I am. And that's me, and that's my story. Any questions?
We've got a couple questions. I'll start while we're getting the mic out across the room. So as a very much newbie to Meshtastic, my first experience with it was I loaded the firmware onto the Meshtastic, and it asked me what band or frequency I wanted. And of course, one of them was in the 440 megahertz band, if I remember right, or 900 meg ham, I can't remember. And that seemed like the obvious choice as a ham, but are they intercompatible, and what is the right choice?
So I think you can use whatever you want as long as you're within like ham band bands. But then obviously, if you're not in a like band, Meshtastic is using encryption, and that's a node who can turn encryption off. Not a lot of people do this. I think that other radios can still receive you if they're running in that encryption mode. but I don't, your mileage will vary. Mostly hams that I've popped are like, I've been really tempted to tick that box one day, but I've never actually done it. The correct band we use in the US, if you want to talk to other people, is it doesn't usually ask you for frequency, it asks you for region, and then it picks the band for you. I think they're trying to be kind of dummy-proof. So the US one is the 900 megahertz ISM band. Some places in the world, they are using different frequencies. Like I think in Europe, people are using both 70 centimeters and the 900 megahertz band. But generally speaking, people are using, actually not 900 megahertz, they're using 868 megahertz.
Hi, this is Larry. I want to thank you for the presentation and really want to thank you for validating my experience with the iOS API. It is, I thought it was just me, but it is extremely unreliable. And like you said, it works sometimes and then it doesn't. And whether that's the API or the node I'm using, I'm not sure, but thanks a lot for that. The second is, how high is your home node antenna? I'm probably 3 miles from you and I see 198 nodes.
My home node antenna at the moment is up on my chimney, so it's reasonably high, reasonably clear, everything around me, but it has a very cheap Meshtastic radio on it because all of my expensive ones are over here on my desk because I tinker with them all the time. So I don't get a lot of traffic here at my home. But I can if I put a nicer radio on it.
Any other questions?
All right, well,
Anything else I can answer people or curiosities? Fantastic.
I think you've stumped the crowd, so, oh, Jim,
Okay.
one more.
Sure.
What about the idea of putting Meshtastic on a pico balloon and flying it around the world? Is there the, what is that, MTTS infrastructure possibly around the world that others would pick it up?
It's all centralized around the world, so yes, it's the same server everywhere. Now, people do have their own servers, but they generally speaking will federate them to this global server, so it is like a single source of information around the world. Could you use that? You can certainly try. I think the biggest obstacle would just be switching frequencies to different places in the world. I have taken my 900 megahertz node over to London and switched it to 868 megahertz. There are not a lot of people online. It's probably getting attenuated a lot, but it does work. I have made contacts over there. So I think as long as you were just like APRS looking at what frequency you were doing over different geographies, I think you could totally do it. Yeah.
Well, we've got an expert here on geofencing and switching frequencies as it goes around the world. Thank
One of
you.
my next challenges is to do a pico flight. I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, well, Patrick, I really appreciate you joining us, and yeah, and enjoy the little kiddos, and I understand the choice not to travel, so. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to leave this Teams going for anybody that wants to stick around on here. We're going to go to lunch. I have it scheduled to lunch until 1:30, so it's going to be about a 2-hour window. You're going to leave the YouTube streaming going? Yeah, sure. YouTube streaming will just be running in an empty room. We're going to go offline effectively. Offline but online. And so, yeah, we'll be back here in about 2 hours. Lunch is across the the parking lot over the student union. They're expecting us. We need to coordinate, your lunch is paid for, so I need to kind of go last, but we'll have to figure out how to deal with that when we get over there.